Hello everyone, my name is Helen Davenport. I'm a commercial litigation partner at Gowling WLG, and today we're going to be talking about some issues around agile contracting that we're frequently asked by clients. I'm joined by Matt Harris, a principal associate in our commercial IT and outsourcing team. So today you're going to get the perspective of both a non-contentious lawyer and a litigator as well. So without further ado, let's get into some of those questions. So what if a customer is thinking about entering into an agile contract, Matt, but they've got a fixed budget? What sort of things should they think about to ensure that happens or mitigate the risks arising?
Thanks, Helen. The obvious place to start really is to look at the extent to which the price can be fixed. There are lots of ways to do this. For example, the customer could be looking at fixed pricing for a particular iteration or development cycle or set of development cycles. They could also be looking at fixing the price for outcomes in the project. So this might be achieving a particular functionality. So for example, the app must do X and you will pay Y for it. But as with any kind of fixed pricing, there's obviously a benefit to the customer, but there is likely to be resisted by a supplier. Some of these activities might be difficult to price up front and will likely meet some kind of supplier resistance or be subject to caveats. One other tactic for fixed pricing, especially in the agile context, is to look at whether you can agree a fixed price for the must-haves in the project and maybe rely on a time and materials based charging structure for the should-haves. That's obviously going to rely on the customer having some strong product management and the product owner having absolute control over the prioritization of must-haves and should-haves.
And it might, Matt, be possible to fix price in terms of specific increments in terms of the activity as well?
Yeah, certainly. But one of the challenges of Agile is perhaps how many increments you're going to need. So certainly some room for commercial discussion up front around how many you think you're going to need and what each of them are going to have to achieve for you.
And perhaps in a scenario, actually, the supplier might be resistant to enter into fixed price at all, even for those increments. So if you're looking at a time and materials arrangement, what steps can the customer take in that scenario and potentially to incentivize the developer?
Yeah, well, there's the natural inclination to think that perhaps time and materials isn't always in the customer's favor. That's not quite right. You know, you get a continuous workflow. There's less likely that you're going to have stop-start conversations around costs and scope, but you're not going to be getting the price certainty. So how do you control that? Well, you as a customer are going to need to be pretty involved with the project to monitor the progress and spend, and also rely on your team to help you achieve that, so product owner. You can also be looking at perhaps considering enhanced discovery phases, not necessarily to negate the creative nature of an agile development, but more to kind of align the parties as to where they're going to be going and get an idea of how many sprints are going to be required, and then manage the delivery against that. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be some incentive, for the nefarious supplier to be slower and require more sprints, but that's something maybe perhaps you can manage through other areas of the contract.
But I think for me, and that's sort of the range of scenarios that where you might get to. But for me, it's really important that whatever arrangement you reach is really clearly documented, and particularly if you're a customer and you think you've got fixed price for the project, then that is actually what is reflected in the documents, as it can be a really common area of dispute. Issues can, for example, arise where the work started before the contract signed, so perhaps the proposal might reflect a fixed price per project arrangement, but the draft contract under negotiation doesn't, or says something different. So we've seen disputes arise in that situation, and also seen disputes arise where work has been undertaken under a framework agreement with a number of work packages underneath it. And if in that scenario, the customer wants fixed price for the project, it's important to make sure that those work packages, when taken together as a whole, do achieve that outcome. And also, whilst you might have fixed price per project as a starting point, it obviously, as the project progresses, there can be a risk that if the parties depart from the key contractual machinery around the pricing arrangements, that can cause ambiguity as well. So really, really important to be clear in the contract and to follow the contract as it continues. Should we move on to another one? Matt, having discussed that one, what if the customer is in the position that they haven't documented their requirements yet, but within the customer team, there's a belief that they can, if required? What
Yeah.
should they do in an agile contracting scenario?
Yeah, so I think it's good to hear just to kind of look back at what you might see in a waterfall contract, which would be a detailed spec up front, and then your developer or your project team would be building against that spec. But obviously in Agile, that's not going to be the way you're working. You're going to start with a product vision and rely on the Agile process to build a product that meets that vision. So the natural thing to do is to look to include at least statements about the product vision. Hopefully that vision will be established by the time you start talking about contracts. So perhaps it should be appended to the actual contract. I mean, it's a core document, so it certainly has a place there. This is the document or description that's going to help to develop other key artifacts involved in the delivery of an Agile project, starting off really with the product backlog and moving forward. And also having the vision on the table in the negotiation process can help kind of focus the parties' minds and give them some context when negotiating individual provisions.
So this is an area in which I'm sort of playing devil's advocate a little bit in terms of Agile, because obviously for Agile, there are the benefits of the Agile in terms of potential outcomes, but you're accepting risk in terms of the journey as a customer, in terms of what you might get as an outcome. And if as a customer you're in a position where you can document your requirements, then I would say it's actually important to think about whether you need to enter into an Agile contract at all. Are the benefits in that scenario worth accepting some of the risks? But it may well depend there in terms of actually what's meant by requirements. What actually can you document? So let's move on to another one then. So what if, as another sort of from the customer perspective, if actually the supplier, sorry, if the customer thinks, well, actually, I think getting the supplier to use the Agile methodology here is what I need for my project, is what would suit us best, but actually the customer's got limited resources or experience itself ahead of the project. What are some of the risks there, Matt, and how might a customer try and mitigate those issues?
Yeah, so once again, it's good to go back and look at what we would be seeing in a waterfall agreement. So in this waterfall kind of classic scenario, there'd be a lot of investment up front in designing requirements and specs, and then the supplier would be charged with getting on with things and building before testing. Slightly different in the Agile context, in that what we're actually engaging here is a long-term, well, a collaborative and iterative project in which the customer is going to be involved and needs to be involved. So therefore, there's need to make sure that you've got appropriate resource in place to participate properly, and also to be aware of the key pinch points when additional resource might be required. So, I mean, your team's going to be extremely important here as a customer. You're going to need to make sure you've got a strong product owner, and also think about whether they're suitably experienced and their qualifications for doing the role, because it's likely that a supplier is going to want some commitments around this. And also in the contract, you're going to be looking at ensuring that they have got their responsibilities well defined, primarily to help you retain control of the key processes. And then when it comes into the wider development team, I think the customer's really got to look closely here at the composition of that team, and think carefully about who or which side is involved at which points and what their roles and responsibilities are. Certainly from the customer side, they're going to want commitments around the supplier's competence, and the members of the team and their competence as well to participate in the project and deliver it properly. And then also as well, one of the kind of key challenges around any development team and commitments of suppliers is ensuring that key members of the team and their knowledge stay with the project for the duration. So that's something you want to seek guarantees around in the contract.
So from what you've said, Matt, that really demonstrates that if on the customer side you are concerned about a lack of resource or a lack of expertise, then that could impact on what's being proposed, whether actually the Agile project will be successful. So it is really important to bear that in mind from the outset that you can deliver on those commitments and you've got a strong enough project owner to manage the project. That being said, of course, what you also talked about was the broader team, and certainly I think what we're not saying here is that it's all on the customer side. The key point here is that it's balance, and from a supplier perspective, it won't want the customer to have full control. But it's important that it's a mixed team and the individuals within those teams have clearly set out roles and responsibilities to mitigate the risks arising from it not being clear down the line.
Yeah, and also just to add to that as well, from the customer's perspective, it's also worth being aware as to what you're committing to contractually, to what extent the processes that you're signing up to what extent are they contractually binding, and also thinking in terms of that process, which bits should and perhaps which bits shouldn't be contractually binding, and having a good awareness of those.
Exactly. So another question or a frequent challenge that we encounter at the outset is where, from a customer perspective, again, the project needs to be completed by a particular date in the future. So in that next scenario, Matt, let's talk about some mitigations that we might put into the contract to try and prevent issues arising where there's an important deadline to be met.
Yeah, so we've already touched on one of these, but probably an enhanced DD phase would be a good place to start, making sure that the parties have a good idea of what's required in order to meet that product vision, even if it's not to certainly tie the hands of the parties and remove the benefits of the collaborative nature of Agile, but just to get people kind of broadly aligned as to the map and the thinking of how they achieve that vision. But then also it's putting incentives in the contract to incentivize the right behavior between the parties. So one of the ways you could do this as a customer is to look at pricing to incentivize your developer. The obvious one that springs to mind would be perhaps bonuses for completing on time, or looking at how the payments are going to be made for the development, perhaps withholding payments or linking payments to completion milestones would be one way to do that, or even looking at the issues of rates, swapping between different rate sets pre and before pre and after your milestone for completion.
So I think those are all some really helpful steps and worth bearing in mind, and things that could be included. From a litigator's perspective, the additional point that I would say on this one, in terms of where there's a target deadline, is that obviously we've talked about these additional risks that Agile can bring along the journey, and I do get slightly nervous as a litigator if the timescales are too ambitious, or the pressure is such on the supplier to achieve a certain date that will you lose out on some of the benefits that you're engaging in an Agile project for in the first place. So whilst obviously it's important to document what you want the supplier to achieve and by when, I think it's helpful as also if you've got some internal contingency beyond that, so that you can react to any issues that do arise along the way. Our next one is a dispute scenario, and of course I've started to touch on issues that can arise along the way in answer to that question. But a common dispute scenario we often see is actually at the end of a project, where the supplier may be waiting for payment of their final invoice, but the customer may be feeling, well, actually, I don't think I got everything I wanted to be delivered here. And they'll be looking at the contractual machinery to see if they can withhold payment of that invoice, and that there's the potential for a stalemate and a dispute. So in that scenario, Matt, what things can we look at to put in place in the contract that might try and mitigate a significant dispute arising in that scenario?
I think the key one is that your contract really should be trying to identify when the project is going to be sort of deemed to have been completed. Typically, this is when items in the product backlog have been provided in accordance with the definition of done. Obviously, as a customer, you need to bear in mind that the backlog at the start of the project isn't likely to look similar to that one at the end, because obviously items will have been completed and there'll have been a revisions and reprioritizations throughout the course of the project. And you're hoping at this point as well that each of the items in that backlog has been tested against the definition of done in the relevant cycles. And also, to kind of provide clarity here as well, it's probably worth including your definition of done as at least an appendix to the contract.
So clarity over what that definition is, and also how that will ultimately be measured, and what needs to be done during the lifetime of the contract to be clear on what done is at the end.
Yeah, exactly. And if things do get to the end, obviously, and there are issues, you're going to be falling back on your dispute resolution mechanism. So it's worth taking some time in the contract drafting process to make sure that that mechanism is robust, it's tiered appropriately, and involves the right people at the right stages.
And our last issue, which is relevant to both parties, but can often be something that the supplier has in mind, is whether actually it will just be possible to manage change through the change process along the way. What are your thoughts on change in an Agile contract, Matt?
Well, change in an Agile world is not a kind of, or a change process is not a natural mechanism. I mean, Agile is supposed to process collaboration over negotiation. There should be a kind of ongoing reprioritization of tasks and focus through the Agile methodology. So if you're looking for change, it probably suggests that you've tried to fix scope or fix areas of the project along the way.
And I agree. Practically, change control procedures work well where obviously you've got functional and technical specifications are agreed up front, so you've got a clear baseline, but it is much harder to apply against a higher level set of business requirements that will evolve during performance. And from a supplier perspective, the case of De Beers and Atos, which is a few years old now, but it still acts as a warning in this area, because amongst other things, that decision covered the issue where Atos sought additional payments, where it considered that the solution it ultimately was working on and was delivering was more complex than originally envisaged. However, the judge in that case rejected most of the claims for those additional monies, finding that they weren't changes in breadth of the scope, but in depth of the scope, which was covered in the price. So although Atos thought that the change mechanism would be helpful, it wasn't a means in that case to them recovering most of the additional monies that they were seeking through that route.
Thanks, Helen. That brings the end to our discussion. I hope you found it useful, and do get in touch if you've got any questions.